QSO Today, episode 272, Ganesh Subramaniam, VU2TS. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by ICOM America, makers of the finest HF, VHF, and UHF transceivers and accessories for the radio amateur, reminding you that they have just the right rig for contesters, DXers, and rag chewers. And by QRP Labs, my friend Hans Summers' G0UPL's radio kit company, makers of the popular QCX kit transceiver. My thanks to ICOM America and QRP Labs for sponsoring the QSO Today podcast. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth, 4Z1UG, your host. Imagine yourself as a teenager discovering amateur radio in a popular magazine and finding no one, even government officials, that can confirm that the amateur radio service even exists in your country. My guest this week is Ganesh Subramaniam, VU2TS, who worked for years just to meet another amateur in Bangalore, India in the 50s. He deserves the prize and demonstrates that persistence pays off in this QSO Today. VU2TS, this is Eric, 4Z1UG. Are you there, Ganesh?
Yeah, good morning, Eric. I'm here. Very good morning, and you're 5 by 9 by me.
Good morning, Ganesh. Thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Our listening audience is around the world, but mostly in the United States. Can you tell the listeners where you're located?
I'm located in a small village called BR Hills. B for Bravo, period. R for Romeo, period. Hills. We are hills up on a mountain, about 1,500 meters above sea level. It's a very small village in South India, in Karnataka state.
Is there a large city that it may be located near if people were looking for you on the map?
The closest large city will be Mysore. That is Mike, Yankee, Sierra, Oscar, Romeo, Echo, Mysore. It's about 80 kilometers west of me.
Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Well, I was born and brought up in Bangalore, South India, which is about 200 kilometers north of me from right now. It all began when I was in high school in the early 50s. I happened to come across an article on ham radio in Popular Science. It described how ordinary citizens can establish their own private radio stations and how they speak to people all over the world. It was a comprehensive article that included their Q code, ham jargon, and also an introduction to Morse code. All of this was strange for me, but that got me hooked.
Well, that's quite amazing. And so what happened after that? Were there other hams around you that could mentor you?
Well, no, I couldn't find any hams, and I was very keen on finding out how to get a license so that I can have my own transmitter at home. So ever since I read that article in Popular Science, I was looking for further information on how to become a ham, but no luck. There were very few hams in India at that time. I met several professionals who insisted that it was illegal to possess and operate private radio stations, HI. I met people like the staff of the local medium wave radio station, the All India Radio in Bangalore. Then I met the Postmaster General in the head post office in Bangalore. And then I met the head of the communications department in the local science institute, and so on. Sadly, none of them had any knowledge of ham radio. I contacted nearly everyone who was in some way connected with radio, but no luck. Eventually, with the help from a friend who was repairing electronic equipment in his spare time, I built a simple 2-valve superhead receiver covering 5 to 10 megahertz. One valve, I remember 6BA7 was one of the valves, and other valve, I forget what it was, HI. And I started monitoring the 40-meter band regularly. The homebrew receiver on an open chassis with no dial indicator or whatever, no BFO. So for me, it was easy to look for 40 meters because I knew that the Voice of America had a powerful station in Ceylon, now known as Sri Lanka, and it transmitted on 7100 kilohertz or thereabouts. And I had to listen to stations below that frequency. That was around 1958. I spent almost a year listening to the radio in my spare time. Finally, I struck pay dirt. There was a Victor Uniform 2 Juliet Alpha talking to a Victor Uniform 2 Romeo Alpha, the call signs used by them, and the signals were loud and clear. The former was Joe Faithful, and the latter was Rajan, both silent key now. They continued their QSOs every morning, and one morning, VU2JA wanted the postal address of VU2RA, and I grabbed a pen and paper. And then came to know that Joe Faithful was in Bangalore and Rajan was located in Tumkur, a small town about 50 kilometers north of Bangalore. The next morning, I was on a train to Tumkur and I found Rajan's QTH. It was easy to locate as it had a huge antenna looking like a spider's web that I came to know later was a cubicle quad. I knocked on the door. The door was opened by an elderly gentleman. And the moment I told him that I'm looking for information on ham license, he invited me and said, "So you're an SWL, HI." He then gave me all the information and the addresses of licensing authority in New Delhi, followed by a demonstration of ham radio. He put out a CQ call on 20 meters, and there was a response from a station from Australia. I was excited. This was the first real-life QSO that I have witnessed. I also came to know that the mode used was amplitude modulation and that Rajan was good at Morse code too. I spent nearly the whole day at Rajan's QTH. We had lunch and we went back to the shack. He gave me the addresses of VU2 Juliet Alpha and also another ham, VU2 Sierra Echo, also Salenkina of Bangalore, and VU2 Alpha Charlie, who was in Uttarakhand at that time, a hill station in South India, known as Ooty, popularly known as Ooty. I left by about 5 p.m. just in time to catch the return train to Bangalore.
Was he impressed at the extent of how you went in order just to figure out how to find somebody that was an amateur radio operator, to the extent of building a receiver, listening to 40 meters, catching the address, and then taking the train? Did that impress him?
Oh, yes. In fact, he asked me, "How did you find me?" He asked me. I told him it took me a year to find you. I told him, and he was highly impressed. And he was also impressed that the person could be so much interested that he spent a whole year inquiring with people and asking people and then finally listening on the radio.
I think that's just a remarkable story, that you went to such an extent and that you couldn't find any government official that could actually confirm the existence of amateur radio operators, even the ones in your city.
That's true. Even the government officials who were involved with radio, like All India Radio, is a transmitting station. I thought at least he might know, so I took trouble of visiting him. And he said, no, it's illegal in India. You cannot possess a radio station. So please go back to your studies and study well and so forth. He gave me the advice, okay?
So what happened after that?
Soon I met VU2 Sierra Echo, that is Mani, in Bangalore. And through him, I met several other shortwave listeners. And together, we attended a Morse class. And by mid-1960, I appeared for the examination. Mani also introduced me to Sulu, VU2 Golf Victor, who helped me to sit for the exam, who gave me a lot of information and also gave me some training in Morse code and so forth. So Sulu VU2 GV was my mentor. Finally, I passed the exam and applied for the amateur radio license.
So you applied for the license. And what was the license you applied for? And when did you get it?
I applied for the license in 1960. I applied for grade 1. There were only 2 grades those days, grade 1 and grade 2. I applied for grade 1. It's equivalent to the advanced grade in the US. I applied for the license in 1960. I received my license in VU2TS in 1965, April 1965. I was 29 years old, and my license number was 350. Yes, I was the 350th amateur radio in India.
So it took 5 years for your license to be issued?
Yeah, exactly.
What did you do during that 5 years as you're waiting for it? I mean, I remember waiting for my first license, and it took 3 months, and I thought it was never going to come.
No, I carried on the normal life, meeting friends and so forth. And, of course, meeting all the other hams who were known to me by that time, like VU2 Golf Victor, VU2 Sierra Echo, and the 2 or 3 other hams I met in Bangalore. They came from Madras and Coimbatore. So we used to meet once in a week or so, have a chat. So generally, I kept in touch with ham radio.
And what did you study from being a teenager through your adult years?
I studied banking and accountancy. It's called BCom, the graduate. So I graduated in 1960.
Your profession had nothing to do with an interest in radio and electronics. This was just a hobby, your side passion then.
Well, not the profession, but the education didn't have anything to do with radio, etc. We'll come to that in future when I answer the next question.
Once you got your license in 1965, what was your first rig? What did you end up building for a transmitter?
After getting my license, I looking around for how to build a transmitter. We had a discarded commercial receiver at home. I cannibalized that and used the chassis to build a transmitter for myself using a crystal on 7013 megahertz. and a 6 Lima 6 tube as the final amplifier. This was a flop. It didn't work. Whatever I did, it didn't work, and I couldn't get any help because the others were busy or whatever. So eventually, I purchased the command transmitter used in the famous DC-3 aircraft those days that used two 1625s in the final, giving me about 80 watts output. I also purchased a military World War II surplus receiver type R107, and soon was on the air. I was on the air with about with a 40-meter dipole within a month after I received the license.
And what was your operating mode?
CW, only CW.
Only CW. Why was that? Did you have an affinity for CW, or the radios that you were using just didn't operate in amplitude modulation or a single sideband?
The radio that I was using was only on CW. But eventually, I got interested in CW, but now I like only CW. I don't feel like getting on the phone.
Right, so what happened after that?
After that, by the time I received my license in 1965, I had already obtained my college degree, and so ham radio did not affect my education in any way. But it was certainly a turning point as far as my career was concerned. You see, I studied banking and bookkeeping, and that had nothing to do with ham radio. However, ham radio taught me scientific and technical stuff, so I decided I was not going to be an accountant or a banker or a judge. By 1972, I started my own small industry manufacturing DC power supplies, and it was quite successful. I developed some new products like a negative ion generator for pollution control and modular power supplies, single voltage, like fixed voltage power supplies, and also an SCR controlled welding machine and so on.
And so that was your own business in manufacturing, and was that in the Bangalore area?
Yes, in Bangalore. I started that in Bangalore. It's not a big factory. I employed only 4 people. I was assembling all this stuff, buy all the components for what was required and assemble the whole thing. I had employed some people who were experts in electronics and so forth.
What was the availability of parts in those days, electronic parts, for building, even starting a business, but for hams who wanted to build their own radios?
The only way we could build radios those days were to visit the local junk shops. There were junk shops operating every Sunday. It's like a flea market elsewhere in the world. We call it a junk shop. Gujili is the right name, actually, where we find all the surplus material. If you want a valve, we can get it there. If you want some chassis, an old chassis there, sometimes you get a complete transmitter not working. So we'll have to put it through and so forth. So the main source of components and the radio was the flea market only.
You say you were number 350 on the list of amateur radio operators in India at that time. That meant that most likely most of the hams were operating homebrew equipment. Was that the case in those days?
I can say in 1965, all of the hams were operating homebrew. There was no imports permitted. We couldn't even import a valve. I heard from somebody that he wanted to import an 807, and he had to apply for a license to import a valve and so forth.
You're saying that importing valves or tubes, vacuum tubes, required licenses in those days. Well, that's quite amazing. How did you get parts for your power supply business then, and building your negative ion generators?
Oh, that was in 72. Just after 70, much later.
Was there something that happened in India by 1972 that made that much easier for that to happen?
Yes. There were a lot of importers already importing and selling it in India, components, etc. And also, you could apply for a license to get it fairly easily when compared to the earlier days of 1960 and 65, So it was a lot better by 72 and 75 and so forth. You could buy most of the components from the shops. There are some streets in which only electronic shops are there in Bangalore. I'm sure it's the same in other countries too.
Yeah, I think it is. It is in a lot of foreign countries. Maybe that was also true in the 60s and 70s in America as well. Southern California, I remember there were a lot of surplus electronic places as a result of the aerospace industry being in Southern California. Let me ask you, what is the current rig that you're operating now? Is it still homebrew?
No. It's not homebrew anymore, because when we make a homebrew transmitter, you'll agree with me, it will not be good enough for contests, for instance. Split operation may not be possible with homebrew sets unless you're really an expert and make a homebrew equal to a commercial transceiver. So that kind of a thing. So for contesting and for de-expedition and so forth, we do depend upon commercial rigs.
Okay, and what commercial rig are you running?
Right now I have a TS480 hooked to a W5GI, is the collinear antenna comprising 3 half waves in phase on 20 meters with a halfway meter of the transformer, line transformer or ladder line. This works on all bands for me, 80 to 10 meters with an antenna tuner. Earlier I had a beam, a 3-element Yagi, but it came down in a storm and it was broken and I had not been able to fix that. So I also use a FT726R, the old one, for satellite communication. I was very active on Oscar 13 for about 4 years, I think. And I'm using an ASU FT8800 VHF UHF transceiver as a base station because we have several repeaters in South India. So that's my setup just now.
Are you a contester?
Yes, I took part in several contests. Right now, conditions are very poor. But in the olden days, I've taken part in almost all the contests every year, like CQWW, CW, then the European contest, CW, and most of the other contests as well. I took part in all of that.
And from India, when the band conditions are good, can you get to Europe easily, get to the United States easily?
Well, from India, we get Europe very easily when conditions were good. We used to get European stations. There used to be pile-up on European stations usually. And sunrise and sunset times, we get United States. Sunrise, we get the West Coast, and the sunset time, we get the East Coast of United States. And, of course, some other stations as well, from other locations, but mainly from the East Coast and West Coast, as I said. Sunrise will be short path for us, and the sunset will be the long path for us.
And now this message from ICOM America. Heard it, worked it, logged it. It's time to get the transceiver that's best suited for your lifestyle. ICOM offers a variety of high-performance and innovative products for the occasional operator, rag-chewer, DXer, or contester. Make the most out of contest season with one of these ICOM transceivers today. The ICOM IC7610 is the SDR every ham wants. This high-performance transceiver has the ability to pick out the faintest of signals even in the presence of stronger adjacent signals. The ICOM IC7610 is a direct sampling software-defined radio, or SDR, that will change the world's definition of an SDR transceiver. The ICOM IC7610 features include RF direct sampling system, 110 dB RMDR, independent dual receivers, and dual digicell. The ICOM IC7300 changes the way that entry-level HF transceivers are designed. This high-performance, innovative HF transceiver with a compact design will far exceed your expectations. I purchased the IC7300 last fall and have fallen in love with its waterfall display, allowing me to zero in on activity and potential QSOs on the air. The ICOM IC7300 features include RF direct sampling, 15 discrete bandpass filters, large 4.3-inch color touchscreen, real-time spectrum scope with waterfall display, and an SD memory card slot. The ICOM IC7851 is the primo contester's HF transceiver. Keep your competitive contesting edge with faster processors, higher input gain, higher display resolution, and a cleaner signal. The ICOM's IC7851 is the pinnacle of HF perfection. The ICOM IC7851's features include dual receivers to allow you to listen and to pounce on contest contacts, digital IF filters, memory keyer, digital voice recorder, high-resolution spectrum waterfall display, enhanced PC connectivity, and an SD memory card slot. So be ready for the upcoming contests this season with a new ICOM transceiver. ICOM has rigs for every level of operator, and they are available at the ham radio store near you. Go to www.icomamerica.com/amateur for more information on these fine ICOM transceivers. And when you make that ICOM purchase, be sure to tell your dealer that you heard about it here on QSO Today. And now back to our QSO. Now, it's my understanding, because you wrote to me, that while you're a CW operator, you've been trying FT8. What do you think of FT8, and how's that working for you?
It's not really exciting for like ham radio, like CW or SSB. FT8, you cannot chat with anyone. It's just a report, and the logging is done by computer. I'm basically a true blue DXer. I still log with my pen and paper on the logbook. So I still write down my log. I don't use the computer so far. Now I'm thinking of changing over to the computer for logging.
That sounds like a great idea. Now, you find yourself in the BH Hills now as a retiree, I guess. Are you actually on the hill itself, and do you have some superior location for working DX?
No. I'm located on the hill. I stay here permanently. I have a house here. I stay here permanently. And I have a farm in which I grow coffee and pepper, black pepper and coffee. That's the farm that keeps me busy during the day, etc.
So are you a gentleman farmer, or is it really a big production?
No, gentleman farmer. I came here for retirement, basically. So keep me active and keep the farm going. So that's the way it works.
You know, India is a huge country. Anybody that has a globe will see that India is as large as the United States, I think. How many amateur radio operators are licensed in India now? And does this include all provinces of India?
Well, the number of amateur stations in India right now, licensed amateurs in India, not stations, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Licensed amateur will be about 16,000, the whole of India. I estimate only about 10% is on the air.
And why do you think that is?
It normally happens, I think. Even when we had only 300 hams, 10% of them were on the air, 30 or 40 were on the air. So generally it happens that when you have a large number of hams, all of them are not on the air. I suppose it's the same with other countries too.
Yeah, no, I think that may be true. Now, do the 10% that are on the air, are those 10% mostly on HF? Where do you find those 10%?
On HF only. In fact, I can even tell you the maximum crowd is on 40 meters, on HF on 40 meters, because in South India, there are more number of hams than in North India, okay? The North and South, you can say beyond Bombay, beyond Mumbai, it's North India for us. And anything below Mumbai is South India. So this part of India, there are more number of hams than anywhere else in the country. So all of them get together on 40 meters when the conditions were good. But right now, even 40 meters is dead in the mornings.
What is the National Ham Radio Organization in India?
We have the Amateur Radio Society of India, for which I am the editor for the newsletter. That is the national organization recognized by the IARU.
Is the Amateur Radio Society of India now responsible for doing testing and licensing of Indians for amateur radio use?
No, we haven't come up to that level yet. For licensing, we still have to approach the government only. We still have to request them to hold the exam, and you need to have a minimum number of students, like 11 or 12 students. And if you want to apply for the exam alone, you need to go to their office and sit for the exam. So this is the type of exams that are going on now.
Now, I'm assuming maybe with the internet that it's easier for Indian shortwave listeners, for example, to find the Amateur Radio Society of India and the process for getting a license. Has the process streamlined a little bit so that if a person takes the test that they don't have to wait 5 years?
Yeah, that's true. After the ARSI has come into existence, they keep in touch with the licensing authority in New Delhi, and a lot of improvements have been made. Lots of improvements have been made. Now you don't have to wait for 5 years anymore. That was long ago. Now in about a month, 2 months or so, we get a license. Sometimes it may take a little time, depending on your application. There may be some fault or something like that, so they can send it back to you, and you send it back to them and so forth. But if everything is okay, the papers are clear, you get licensed in about 2 to 3 months now. So that's one improvement. And then recently, after the RSI approached the authorities, they have removed the restrictions on mobile transmissions. Like suppose you want to go on a field day. Earlier, we need to have applied to the authorities about 2 months back, to get a license to go on a field day, take your transmitter and go on a field day, or a Scout Jamboree, for instance, which is coming up next week, Scout Jamboree. So we need to move our equipment to the school or wherever we want to hold the Jamboree. So earlier we used to apply for license 2 months earlier, but not anymore. We can simply take it over there and set up a station and keep a proper log of where you operate from and so forth. So these kind of improvements have already been done. So we're very happy about that.
So mobile operation is not common in India. So if you want to put an HF rig in your car, that's not a common thing and is not allowed by the law?
No, mobile operation is no problem. No, we can operate mobile HF or VHF or whatever. Even earlier, the VHF mobile was freely available because VHF, there was no restrictions on mobile. So in fact, I carried a mobile station in my VHF as long as I was in Bangalore. But from here, there is no nearby VHF station, so I removed it. That's all. Otherwise, anybody can have a VHF radio in the car and operate the repeaters wherever they're traveling and so forth.
Now, in the 70s, when you first got your license and you were starting your business, did you have a VHF radio in the car, and what were you using in those days?
No. We didn't have a VHF at that time. Only by about 80s, early 80s, VHF came to India. Until then, we never had VHF at all.
The first radios then, if it was by the 80s, were the Japanese radios like ICOM and Kenwood.
Yeah, that's right. They have become very popular. ICOM, Kenwood and Yaesu have become very popular. In fact, I was a dealer for Yaesu radio in Bangalore for about 25 years.
Now, as a dealer, you also did the repairs.
No, I had to pass it on to some other people with whom I had, I'm outsourcing it for repairs, okay?
Do Indian hams still have challenges getting ham radio equipment? Is it a big process to bring in when you were bringing in Yaesu? Was it a problem to import it?
Not anymore, but the problem now is, suppose you want to get the top-of-the-line equipment, you may not be able to do so because they set a limit on the purchasing power. How much was the value that you can buy for? So that could be a problem. And we have now reduced the customs duty for people who are importing equipment. They set a limit of 75,000 rupees. If you buy an equipment for 75,000 rupees from abroad, that's ICOM or any other company, there won't be any duty on that. If it exceeds that, then you have to pay hefty duty on the equipment. So suppose you want to buy, let us say, the latest like FT101 that you have now, you won't be able to do it at all because it's far too expensive and the custom duty will be almost equal to the price.
I interviewed Ashar Farhan, VU2ESE, in episode 87 of the QSO Today podcast. In the interview, I came to believe that many old-timers in India, as you say, were building their own rigs. Do Indians build their own rigs now? Is there still a big homebrew industry there?
No, not a big homebrew industry. Only very few people are homebrewers. Very few when compared to the number of stations coming in just now. But some of them are very keen homebrewers and they still continue to bring. There are some who have built VHF equipment and some repeaters are homebrew repeaters that we have. So that way, but it's not big as you said it might be.
Now you mentioned that VHF came to India in the 80s. Do you also have the UHF band there for repeaters?
No. At that time we had only VHF repeaters, only VHF. And in Bangalore, we had the first repeater in India, for that matter. I was secretary at that time. And we had the Repeater Society of Bangalore. So we installed a repeater. And that was on VHF alone. Now we have something like 20-odd repeaters all around South India. Even on the repeaters, the number of repeaters in South India is much more than in the North.
Are those repeaters or any of those repeaters linked together in networks so that you have greater mobile coverage?
No, we don't have that. We still haven't done that. We're thinking of that now. From Bangalore, we are having a project to see if we can link a few repeaters so that we'll have a longer range. Right now, we have repeaters in fairly good locations. In Bangalore, it's on a 13-story building, sorry. And there is one on Nandi Hills. It's about 1,000 meters, about 800 meters above sea level, a little more than that. So like that, we choose some good locations, which has fairly good range. Covers a fairly good range, and sometimes we get some outstation people checking in on the repeaters and so forth when the conditions are good.
How do government authorities in India view hams as emergency communication providers? What roles do Indian hams play in times of emergency?
Oh, we have been doing wonderful work in terms of emergency, like floods. It's quite common in India. Floods are quite common in India. Like even those days, even in my olden days with homebrew setups and all that, we used to take the homebrew setup and go away to wherever they needed and operate the station. I operated one such station. Of course, I didn't take a homebrew at the time. I had already a commercial setup. We had a heavy flooding in near the launching station we have now, ISRO launching station in Sriharikota. Very close to that, we had flooding and a couple of villages were marooned. So I offered as a volunteer and I was picked up in a helicopter and taken to that village. And I set up my station there, contacted Hyderabad. It's quite far from there. That's the headquarters of that area, of that region, state. I went there and operated for 4 days from the location. VHF and HF. I had VHF because one other village nearby was marooned, and a friend of mine who was also with me in Bangalore, we went to Golf X-ray. He came along with me, and he was in another village, and we both were in contact with each other on VHF. While both of us were contacting Hyderabad on HF on 40 meters mostly. Hyderabad is fairly close, about 500 kilometers, that's all. And we did wonderful work there. They were all very happy with all the work that we did. We got medicines, we got food, whatever they wanted, we could get it from there, from Hyderabad or anywhere else. So that everybody was very happy. So that way, we started off even very early. And right now, wherever there's any calamity, any emergency, there's a group of hams ready to go. The group of hams who are volunteered, and the Amateur Radio Society of India, ARSI, have provided grab kits. We have a kit in which there's a dipole and various other things that you may require for emergency station, except the rig, of course. So you take a grab kit and you're off with your rig, and you can set up a station in about 10 minutes. So that way we're extremely good. So as far as emergency is concerned, we're doing a wonderful job there in that line.
Okay, so a grab kit is, we call it in the West, we call that a go box. It's like a suitcase that has everything you need to set up.
Yes, that's right.
Oh, very good. And does the Amateur Radio Society of India, does it have formal training for hams so that everyone knows what to do and how to set up the grab boxes and to operate properly?
No, there is no formal training just now. But some of the old timers pass on whatever information that other people want. For instance, I won't be able to go on any emergency setup now. I'm too old for that. So if any youngsters want to go, we kind of give them a good idea of what is required and what to be done and so forth. And by experience, they pick up themselves. Usually, in a group of volunteers who go for emergency service, there will be at least 2 or 3 old-timers who are going along with them, who are experienced. So the newcomers will learn from that only. There is no formal training as such.
Are there enough emergency events that keep these people busy?
No. There are not a lot of emergency, no. At best, maybe once or twice in a year. And that's usually handled by the local people in the same area. They will handle it. Only a major emergency like earthquake and all need more hands, more equipment, and even a flood, for instance. Last year, there were heavy floods in South India, very close to my 2 days, as a matter of fact. Very heavy floods. So more than 20 hams or so took part in emergency operations in Kerala and also in Karnataka. So it's not very often that it happens, okay?
Are there other events like bicycle races or festivals or things like that that ham radio operators participate in India?
We have motor rallies in India, for instance. Every year there are about 4 or 5 motor rallies taking place in various locations in India. So earlier we used to help them with communications. But nowadays, since we have cell phones and other facilities available for communication, it's not very, very much in demand. Otherwise, for about 10 to 12 years, we used to take part in all the motor rallies to give communication. And the bicycle races and all that, we don't have such major bicycle races like you have in France and USA. We have only local bicycle races for which they don't need communications, number one. And then the other emergencies, not emergency actually, other requirement would be when there is a crowd, huge crowd for some festival or something, it's called crowd control. But I personally discourage that because amateur radio is not meant for all that, and the government can handle that easily because they have all the facilities. Only if there's an emergency, even the government cannot do anything, then amateur radio come into the picture. That's my personal opinion.
Let me take a quick break here to tell you about my favorite amateur radio audio podcast, the Ham Radio Workbench Podcast with George, KG6VU, and Jeremy, KF7IJZ, where they pursue topics, technology, and projects on their ham radio workbenches every 2 weeks. George and Jeremy document their projects and make circuit boards available for sale to their listeners. They have interesting guests and go in deep. Even if you're a seasoned ham radio builder or just getting started, be sure to join George and Jeremy for the Ham Radio Workbench podcast. Use the link on this week's show notes page by clicking on the image. And now back to our QSO today. The new Qatari geosynchronous satellite S-HAIL seems to be ideal for interconnecting hams across India. Is this satellite and this mode of operation, is that becoming popular with Indian hams? And how is it promoted?
Yes, it's becoming very popular with Indian hams. Already in Bangalore and in Mysore, very close to my location, and in Chennai, I think, South India, there are about total about 10 or 12 hams already operating from ES-HAIL. And there's the Indian net actually, operated by one of the Indian stations, VU2 station. They have a net also on the satellite. So it's quite popular. Right now, the equipment will be complicated. It's slightly complex when compared to the normal HF and VHF operation. So we are arranging a workshop shortly in Mysore. We're arranging a workshop for all those interested to come there and find out how to set up this station without importing any equipment, make a converter for the existing receiver, make a converter and make a transmitter. And the antennas are easily available because the same antenna that you use for a TV reception, TV channels, that can be used for this because it's on 10.4 something gigahertz. So that way, it's going to become very popular in the next 1 year or so.
Do you think that satellite operation is an ideal mode for a country like India that's so large and spread out?
Yes, it could be ideal mode in case, for instance, in case tomorrow there's a very serious emergency and it is required that we contact several stations around that area where the emergency took place. The best thing would be to use the Q100, the satellite, the geostationary satellite, the best thing. But then again, the equipment should be ready. It should be easily portable equipment. We can't have a home brew there because it will be loose wires and so forth. So we'll have to make something to do with the equipment. Then eventually that will be the ideal thing. But if it is not so large an emergency, so large a calamity, then even the VHF and the HF will do that in the same locations.
I'm curious, do you see that an effort could be made similar to Farhan's Bitex transceiver? Do you see that the Indian hams could create a package or a kit for the geosynchronous satellite that could be even offered outside of India?
Yeah, that's true. That's exactly what we're trying to do now. See how easily we can make it, easily portable and also easily putting it together so that we'll have a working station at short notice. It can be QS, we can take it out to any other location also. That's what we're trying to do. As I said, it might take a little time, maybe in the next 1 year it'll all be true. Various people are getting together to do this work.
That sounds very amazing. And the way to follow that work is just follow the Amateur Radio Society of India's website. Would that be the right place?
Well, that's one of the locations. Actually, we're doing it privately, not with the ARSI cell, because ARSI is, the members are all over India. So for all of them to get together may be difficult. So we're doing it locally, like in Mysore, one small group in Mysore, and one group in Chennai, and maybe another group in Mumbai. This like that, each group. When one group makes it viable, then it's easy for the other group to catch up.
Okay, well, that sounds amazing. And what I'll do is I'll keep in touch with you and keep it on your show notes page and update it as things progress, because I know that there's a lot of people outside of India who are very interested in the Qatari satellite S-Hail. It could be quite interesting as a way to make another form of communications that isn't reliant on the propagation that we don't seem to have right now.
Yeah, that's true.
What kind of impact has amateur radio had on your family life all these years?
I can't say much about that because I am, and I have always been single, and so I really cannot answer that. However, when I received my license, I was living with my parents, and they encouraged me to pursue the hobby. And I had an elder brother, now silent key. He appeared for the exam also after I did, and he got a license, VU2TS. He wasn't very active he wasn't very active like me. So family, I had no problem. But the hobby certainly had an effect on my personal life. You see, when I started operating VU2TS regularly, my social life took a backseat. Usually, I used to go out with friends on weekends and see a movie and eat out and so on. All that stopped completely because I was very keen on getting on the air and making contacts in the evening after coming back from work. I used to work at that time. As a matter of fact, between 1965 and 1970, I did not watch a single movie. I was meeting friends only on important occasions like weddings or whatever. Eventually, all my close friends were also radio amateurs, so everything was okay by that time. Even today, I have very few non-ham friends who I'm in touch with.
Are there a fair number of your ham radio friends that live around you? I was looking at Google Earth and looking at where you're located. As we say in America, you're way out in the sticks. You're quite a ways from large civilization. Are there hams close to you?
No. There are no hams close to me. So I sometimes boast that I'm the only ham in the whole district here. It's the Chamarajanagar district. I'm the only ham so far. And as I said earlier, the nearest hams are in Mysore, about 80 kilometers west of me. Otherwise, I'm absolutely remote And now I'm not able to trigger many repeaters from this location, even though we have an altitude. So I keep trying, putting up various antennas, beams, and so on for the VHF. But for satellite work, this is the ideal place, no problem at all. So there are no nearby hams for me.
What do you think is the greatest challenge facing amateur radio now?
Number one is technology. Big challenge. You see, you may wonder how technology can be a challenge. Well, with the developments in technology, we now have mobile phones and satellite phones and so forth for worldwide communication, and the communication has become very economical too. Consequently, it has become difficult for me to explain to the general public that ham radio is not about communications alone. It's a scientific hobby, and one can learn so much which you cannot learn from a college or a degree. So ham radio is only a hobby and a way for those interested in radio to experiment and learn about wireless communications. It's a hobby, a way for many to get enjoyment from the many facets of the hobby. The problem is when we showcase ham radio as means of communications, people think of easier methods like mobile phones, etc. So actually it's a lot more than that. And then I need to make a distinction between mobile phone and ham radio. Like we cannot call any stranger on a mobile phone and talk to him. Mobile phone is primarily for communications, and one can call a known person or someone for a business inquiry or so forth. Whereas in ham radio, it's quite different, I talk to almost all the locations in the world on an everyday basis. So we do it all the time on ham radio. I remember the old saying, the world is in your home, or world is in your pocket, or whatever. As a consequence, the serious amateur radio enthusiasts are old people like me. I'm 83, and I notice most youngsters who take up the hobby these days are interested only in communicating, not much of technical stuff like home brewing. As I said earlier, very few take up home brewing, building and experimenting with antennas and so on. As a matter of fact, more than 90% of the newcomers do not know CW. I feel very bad about that. They don't need it, They keep talking to each other. So in my time, CW was compulsory, and one needed to learn with Morse code sending and receiving at least 5 words per minute to pass the examination. But not anymore. You don't require CW anymore. So the art of CW is dying. That's one big challenge for me to bring people back to CW, At the same time, technology of modern radio, especially digital communication, is too far advanced for most people, and this discourages some from taking up the hobby. See, in the olden days, when I took up the hobby, it was very simple. Though I did my commerce education, I could do something with radio because it was fairly simple, putting together a transmitter, using wires, and things like that was very simple. But now you can imagine how much more complicated it is when you want to go for some good radio setup and making it homebrew. Another challenge is the way of life in these modern times. Very few people have spare time for the hobby. Life has become a rat race, and not many think of hobbies that can actually relieve stress. So these are all the kind of challenges that I think is facing amateur radio these days.
Well, I guess as India is really modernizing at hyper speed, then you're right. I guess people are working all the time. Is there a maker movement in India in order to interest young people, at least in putting their hands into technology and taking it apart rather than specializing in various aspects of engineering?
Ham radio, we are now, since the mobile moving the transceiver from your shack is not licensed anymore. In Bangalore, the club, there's a local club in Bangalore, the Bangalore Amateur Radio Club, of which I was a founder member, by the way. And the club members are volunteered. They had already one session already. They took they established some stations in various locations in Bangalore to make the hobby more popular. So the public come and ask you what's going on. So they tell them, this is what it is, ham radio, it's a good hobby, you learn so many things and so forth. So we're trying to make it as popular as possible.
And now this message from QRP Labs. QRP Labs has shipped thousands of QCX QRP transceivers kits to date. The odds of working another QCX user gets better every day. If you're looking for a satisfying kit experience where you end up with an amazing performing QRP transceiver for under $50, let me say that again, for under $50, then you owe it to yourself to go to QRP Labs. We have many home brewers who listen to the QSO Today podcast. For you, QRP Labs also has parts, filters, enclosures, and other handy devices to make your home brewing experience even better. You can use these parts to either enhance your QRP Labs kits or to beef up your own homebrew designs. Be sure to browse Hand's entire website. Use the link on this week's show notes page or the one in the sponsored section of the QSO Today website to get to QRP Labs to buy your QCX or any of the other fine QRP Labs kits or parts. QRP Labs is my go-to ham radio kit company. It should be yours too. QRP Labs. And now back to our QSO Today. I see in North America and also in Israel that the technology professions don't go into the technology as deep as we did with amateur radio or as we do with amateur radio. Do you see that there could be potentially a problem in India with an inability to know how to troubleshoot and fix electronic devices? Or do you think that we're going to a throwaway culture where that won't be necessary?
Oh, that might be a problem. As things are getting more and more complicated, we need some specialists only to do certain things. Unlike earlier, it takes on a whole meaning of amateur. Earlier, we used to be known as amateurs because we're between the professionals and the real amateurs. Amateur radio was in between those two, and amateur radio operator knew most of what's going on in the radio and how to fix it and everything else. But not anymore. You import a rig now, one of the modern rigs and all, you won't be able to fix anything. You have to replace the whole PC board and things like that. And even opening it and finding it so complicated, you'll get the shivers, look at the new equipment. So eventually, what you said might happen. But then I suppose it's part of life, and that's how we get on. When rig goes bad, you check it away and get a new one.
Yeah, I see that. I somehow think of amateur radio operators, at least those of us who've been doing it a long time, and even those of us who haven't been doing it a long time but have really dived into it, that we have this kind of systems orientation. So it's not just the transmitter or the receiver that we're working with. We understand feed lines, we understand antennas, we understand electric power and how to power our rigs and how all that stuff goes together. And I guess amateur radio brings with it a huge suitcase of technical skill that amateur radios acquire over time. And I guess what I'm perhaps saying I'm seeing at least missing in the West is that expertise is not propagating to younger people. And I'm just, as I say, wondering whether that's also an issue in India.
Quite true. That's actually an issue in India because I know all the old-timers, all my friends who are hams along with me, or even a little later than me, they're all fairly good at most other things. For instance, if anything else goes wrong at home, they don't invite any serviceman. They fix it themselves. That kind of natural ability to fix things and understand what's wrong and, like you said, know about power and know about electricity, all the things up and down. So the present generation is not like that at all. The present generation, as I said, they're busy with their own work, and even a small thing, they call a serviceman to fix it. And so eventually that may become a huge problem for amateur radio because the original amateur radio, idea of amateur radio was do it yourself, like build your own set, build your own antenna, and get on the air, see how it works, and make sure that everything is 100% okay, stuff like that. That may not be possible in future.
What excites you the most about what's happening in amateur radio now?
Well, it's difficult to say because everything about amateur radio excites me, even today. All the technology and advancement, I'm happy that I can still get on the band and rack you with someone on the other side of the world. I can talk to people who share common interests with me, and I get to know about life in a different part of the world. I can never forget the rack you had with the ham in Nuuk, Greenland, I learned a lot about Greenland, learned a lot about life in that part of the world, and I'm sure he was equally excited to talk to someone from India. I gave him a lot of information, like we are talking now. I gave him plenty of information from India. And the whole chat was on CW and answered Oscar 13. Can you believe it? So I was really excited that time. And now, just now, when we are feeling sad about the solar minimum and very poor, bad conditions, there is the Qatar Oscar 100 geostationary satellite, and that offers 24/7 QSOs worldwide, almost worldwide. So honestly, for me, it's like meditation. Once I am on the air, I am transported to another universe. HI. What advice?
That's pretty amazing. And you're right that we forget, for those people that are not following the S-Hale satellite, that it's a translator. It's not a repeater in that sense. So it has a CW band in it. From what I was looking in the newsletter that you published that had an article on S-Hale, and you actually show the band segments in the satellite itself. So if you're a CW operator, there's a CW band there, isn't there?
Waiting for my satellite equipment here so I can get on CW on Q100.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. What advice would you give to new or returning hams to the hobby?
I normally tell them to take up the hobby seriously and not just for talking to one another, like what time are we meeting and shall we have a beer and stuff like that. But more than that, you can talk to people. You can talk about technology, for instance, what equipment you have, and you can ask questions to other experts who can answer you. So like that, take it up seriously. At the same time, let it not interfere with your family or your education. There are many youngsters who are still studying who take up the license. So their hobby shouldn't come in the way of the education. And remember, purchasing a commercial rig and setting up to talk to others is no big deal. Take up home brewing of accessories, antennas, etc. There are amateurs whose entire station is home brew even now. That teaches us a lot. And then, of course, you need to join and support the local society or the club. And, of course, the national society. You get to meet other hams. When you join a club, you get to meet other hams, attend meetings, and exchange knowledge. You can be an active member and organize field events, or you can participate in such events organized by others. Many times, you may not need to approach the country's licensing authority, and if the society does it on your behalf. So being a member of a club or a society is helpful that way. And of course, the last thing that you remember, TX Code of Conduct. When you get on the air, the Code of Conduct, you must remember, make a poster and stick it in your shack there. That's what I tell the people.
It seems in the West that there are many hams that don't follow a code of conduct. Is the code of conduct an issue in India as well?
Absolutely. I think wherever there are humans, there'll be issues like this. The reason we cannot easily say, some may do it for fun, they don't follow. Some people are habitually not following rules, etc. So there are some black sheep like that. So it's not a big issue, it's not a major issue, but it is an issue.
Is there a parting word that you'd like to give the audience before we say 73?
I greet all the listeners. The greetings from South India, PR Hills in South India. And this is VU2 Tango Sierra. Thank you for listening.
Well, Ganesh, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you today from Israel to India. I very rarely get to speak to Indian hams. I had the pleasure of actually meeting Farhan at the Dayton Hamvention. Oh, by the way, I didn't ask you. Have you been to Dayton, and is that on your bucket list if you haven't been?
I've not visited Dayton, Ohio. In fact, I've not visited the United States. I've been to some countries in Europe and the Far East, but not the United States.
Would the Dayton Hamvention be on your list of conventions to go to?
Well, it was on my bucket list once upon a time, but now I think I'm too old for that kind of travel and activity. So I have to think about it. In case I have good company going with me, probably I might still make it.
Before we go, I want to ask the question, what is the largest ham gathering in India?
It used to be what's known as a ham fest, the RSI, that's the National Society used to organize every year, ham fest. It used to be fairly large, like 2,000 hams and so forth used to meet. But now we have a society in Hyderabad. They're pretty big, and a lot of people come there from all over India. I think it goes up to some 5,000-6,000 hams. I'm not very sure, but it's a big number. Largest number now is from that society in Hyderabad.
Sounds amazing. Ganesh, I want to thank you very much for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. As I said earlier, I very rarely get to speak to hams from India, and learning more about ham radio in India is very interesting to me, and I know it'll be very interesting to my audience. So with that, I want to wish you 73, and thank you so much for joining me on the QSO Today podcast.
Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure talking to you. 73 to you and to all the listeners over there from India. This is VU2 Tango Sierra signing.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Ganesh. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in VU2TS, VU2 Tango Sugar, in the search box at the top of the page. My thanks to both ICOM America and QRP Labs for their support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support of these fine sponsors by clicking on their links in the show notes pages, or when you make your purchases, that you say that you heard it here on QSO Today. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any of the other episodes into written text, please contact me. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes page. I am grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference. QSO Today is now available on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Libsyn, and TuneIn, as well as the iTunes Store. If you own an Amazon Echo, you can say, "Alicia, play the QSO Today podcast from TuneIn." I still use Stitcher to listen to podcasts on my smartphone. The links to all of these services are on the show notes pages on the right side. Until next time, this is Eric 4Z1UG73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.